Before there was the Joker, before Batman ever existed, there was The Man Who Laughs. This silent film, made in 1928, remains one of the most visually striking and emotionally resonant films in cinema history. It's a film that bridges the gap between a silent-era drama, German Expressionism, and horror. And it inspired filmmakers for decades. In fact, without it, we might not have one of the most iconic pop culture villains in history. I'm Antonia Carlotta, and this is Universally Me, the channel for all things Universal and classic horror. My uncle Carl Laemmle started Universal, and he made The Man Who Laughs, which then it's kind of crazy to think that without Uncle Carl, we might not have the Joker. The story of The Man Who Laughs is based on a novel by Victor Hugo, originally published in 1869. It tells the story of tragic Gwynplaine, a man whose face has been disfigured into a permanent smile. Much like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, also by Victor Hugo, The Man Who Laughs tells a story of deep melancholy, societal rejection, and human cruelty. The Man Who Laughs was many years in the making. After the success of The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923, starring Lon Chaney, Universal wanted to capitalize on something similar, so they offered Lon Chaney the lead in The Man Who Laughs. The original effort was going to be a collaboration between Universal and a French studio, but they ended up having some issues over the rights, and the whole project was delayed a couple years. In that time, Lon Chaney made Phantom of the Opera, which came out in 1925, and it was after the success of Phantom that Uncle Carl turned his attention back to The Man Who Laughs. This time, his first two hires were two fellow Germans. He brought on Paul Leni to direct, and because Lon Chaney was now under contract with MGM, Conrad Veidt was hired to star as Gwynplaine. Before this, Conrad Veidt was mostly known for his work in The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which was a German expressionist masterpiece that basically defined the genre. After appearing in his first American film, The Beloved Rogue, in 1926 with John Barrymore, all of the US studios were courting him, but it was Uncle Carl at Universal that won the contract at $2,000 per week. Conrad Veidt was the perfect choice for The Man Who Laughs, with its angular face and his expressive eyes. And Paul Leni was perfect too. This movie was clearly pulling from the German Expressionist playbook, and Paul Leni was an important figure in the German Expressionist movement. He'd even worked with Conrad Veidt before on Waxworks. I also recently made a video about The Cat and the Canary, which is another German Expressionist amazing film made by Paul Leni, and I think all of this is to say that there was no way that The Man Who Laughs wasn't about to be a German Expressionist masterpiece of its own. Oh, and of course, we have Mary Philbin rounding out the cast. Mary Philbin was excited for the role and doubly excited to be cast alongside Conrad Veidt, who was a friend of hers. The budget on this movie was about $1 million, which was a lot at the time. A lot of that money went into elaborately constructed sets led by Charles D. Hall, who was an art director at Universal who worked on everything from Phantom of the Opera, All Quiet on the Western Front, Dracula, Frankenstein, Showboat, and more. He oversaw a big team to help build the Southwark Fair with rides, the House of Lords, the Thames Embankment, old streets of London with alleys and shops, Queen Anne's Royal Suite, and more, all on the Universal backlot. Now let's get into the movie itself. Set in 17th century England, young Gwynplaine is kidnapped and mutilated by a group of criminals called the Comprachicos. They carve a permanent smile into his face as an act of political revenge against his father. Poor Gwynplaine is abandoned. While trying to make his way through a snowstorm, he rescues a baby named Dia, whose mother has frozen to death, and the two were soon taken in by a showman. Dia, it turns out, is blind. Years later, Gwynplaine and Dia are still with the traveling showman. Gwynplaine and his smile have made him rather popular as the laughing man, though he carries great shame about his face, and though he's deeply in love with Dia, he's terrified for her to find out what he looks like. I don't want to spoil the whole movie, so you'll just have to watch, but it really is amazing, and it's such a good blend of horror, of tragedy, and even romance. And Conrad Veidt as Gwynplaine, he's truly amazing, especially when you remember that he is acting through layers of makeup and a dental contraption that hooked his mouth up at the corners. And would you believe that this look was created by the legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce, the same Jack Pierce that would later go on to work on Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein and The Mummy and more? After Monkey Talks, the 1927 film that secured Jack Pierce his contract with Universal, I would say The Man Who Laughs was the film that really drove home how Jack Pierce could transform people into entirely new characters. And I'm sure that this was pivotal just a few years later when the Universal monsters were born. One story from behind the scenes that cracked me up was that there was a horse that had already been filmed in some scenes that then got the flu, which honestly, I didn't even know horses got the flu. But because now it couldn't film, Jack Pierce was tasked with finding a similar looking horse and using grease paint to recreate the markings from the original horse so they could essentially have a horse double get filmed. The Man Who Laughs opened April 27th, 1928, and despite everything that I said, it was not a hit. Some people didn't like the subject matter. They thought that it was too dark and scary. And other people had a really tough time with all the German influence. They didn't think that it represented 17th century England. The New York Times called The Man Who Laughs gruesome and interesting and said that it was one of the few pictures that year that didn't have a handsome leading man. And I know what they're saying. I understand it doesn't totally apply here, but agree to disagree. Of course, history tells a different story. The Man Who Laughs is considered one of the great classics. Roger Ebert himself called it one of the final treasures of German silent expressionism. Paul Lenny is seen as a genius, making brave directorial choices and finding ways to bring forth both tears and fear at the same time. And I'm not sure any other actor could have brought Gwynplaine to life the way Conrad Veidt did. Of course, I would love to see Lon Chaney's take on it, but what we got was perfection. He manages to communicate so much without ever saying a word, he can hardly move his face. It's not a stretch to say that without The Man Who Laughs, the Universal monsters might look very different. I look at movies like The Man Who Laughs, The Cat and the Canary, The Phantom of the Opera, even The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and I see these as Universal dipping their toes into horror and seeing its future potential. Gwynplaine is part of this really strong lineage of monsters, though I hesitate to use that name, but these tragic villains, these characters that scared audiences but also fascinated them and pulled at their heartstrings too. The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Phantom of the Opera, Frankenstein, The Wolfman. Gwynplaine is in great company. Nearly a century after its release, The Man Who Laughs still holds up as a powerful and visually stunning piece of cinema. It has such beautiful themes of beauty, of cruelty, of the masks that we all wear. And if you haven't seen this movie, of course, I'm going to tell you, you have to see it. In the comments below, tell me your favorite tragic villain, be it Gwynplaine or Frankenstein or the Wolfman, the Phantom, or anyone else, whoever. Don't forget that if you join with a paid YouTube membership, you get tons of bonus content. It's an amazing way to show your support for my work, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.